If you're in first year, welcome to the magic that is Art Forum. If you're in second year and third year, or you're in one of our postgraduate courses, welcome back, and we look forward to seeing you throughout the year. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I want to take a moment and invite you all to ground yourself in the deep knowledge that long before the VCA was thought of, long before the University of Melbourne was considered, the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation for generations practiced song and dance on this country. They made paintings, sculptures, shared stories, practiced healing, and those rituals and traditions continue to this day. So it's with joy and honour that I acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. So just before I introduce Matt Keegan, does everybody feel sufficiently welcomed to Federation Hall and to Art Forum? Is there anybody who is not sufficiently welcomed? Because I will welcome you further if you need it. Everybody's got, did you need a welcome, Joanna? Listen, Joanna, welcome to Art Forum. Welcome to Federation Hall. Are you sufficiently welcomed now? Excellent, excellent. All right, so it's a real treat for me to introduce to you the first guest speaker of the year, Matt Keegan. So Matt is a senior critic in the Painting and Printmaking Department at Yale University. He works fluidly across mediums, creating sculpture, drawings, photographs, collage, video, and publications. A through line of his interdisciplinary practice is a foundational interest in how we communicate and attempt to make sense of the world through images. Matt's interest in cognition is rooted in research and material play that often leads to working in series. Previously circulated visual material folds into his art making as a way of accessing the link between visual and spoken language, for photographing, reproducing or translating images from one media to another. Matt's work has been exhibited at museums, including the Museum of Modern Art, New York, the Carpenter Center for Visual Arts at Harvard University, Contemporary Arts Museum, Houston, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, Bilbao, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the New Museum of Contemporary Art, New York. Matt is visiting Australia and visiting the VCA with a Stuart Black Fellowship, and he's located for the next amount of time in DPM here at the VCA. Whether you're on Zoom or whether you're here with us in Federation Hall, please join me in making Matt Keegan very, very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was a lovely introduction. I'm so happy to be here, and I didn't even realize I was kicking off this lecture series, so hopefully I kick it off on a good note. And it's really a privilege to be here also with Dane Mitchell, who's a really old friend of mine. We realized that we met 28 years ago when we were both in the same undergrad program. Dane visited my program at Carnegie Mellon, and then I visited what was AIT in Auckland in 1997. So I'm very happy to be here. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, so I'm just gonna read a very brief text that I wrote this morning. So since we're in a school context, I wanted to provide some brief background. So my undergraduate education at Carnegie Mellon University, where I met Dane, was an interdisciplinary program where students were supported in choosing the media of their work based on the project, not based on a departmental affiliation. Additionally, students were strongly encouraged to experiment in various media and to collaborate. My art making has never deviated from this multimedia and highly collaborative way of working. My education at CMU was in the mid to late 1990s, so I was taught by second wave feminists such as Faith Wilding and artists and educators at the vanguard of researching surveillance, as well as gender and LGBT studies, such as Steve Kurtz of Critical Art Ensemble. The internet, as we know it, was forming at this time, and media studies was growing as a discipline. I was in college when an HIV diagnosis was no longer a death sentence due to drug cocktails that began to be more readily available in the US by 1996. So 30 years ago is both a long time and the recent past. And in the US, these advances in education, gender studies, respecting the process of one's own gender identification, as well as access to HIV care, are all currently under attack. This is a time of great violence and a strategic campaign against education, the ability to protest, debate, and for analysis. At the root of my work, as David mentioned, is a desire to understand how we communicate with one another between family, friends, lovers, and across generations. So I was fortunate to attend a tail end of a lecture run by Tessa and Tristan to look at different ways of thinking about art methodologies. And something that really strikes a chord with me is thinking about patterning, the idea of the template and how the template moves between media and moves between ways of learning, ways of knowing, ways of exploring, ways of understanding the world. So through my work that exists in different registers, and I'm going to begin with an older work. This is a 2-channel video called N as in Nancy that I return to again and again. The Nancy who's on the left is my mother, and on the right is a series of 60 images that she created by hand to teach English as a second language coursework. My mother's a first-generation Cuban American. Her first language was Spanish. And she created these images, cutting up printed matter that came into our home from catalogs, newspapers, union mailers, different material that she then art directed and repurposed for these language lessons. So this video runs about 3 minutes. You'll see her assign a word or phrase to the image at right, and then what she says is translated into Spanish.
Christmas, skiing, Aqua Beach, perfect wave, summer, Father's Day, First Communion, Navratilova, basketball with the boys, Bon Voyage, the girl in the gallery, Siamese, the boys in the laundromat, Peacock, telephone, fighting, moving, bald, dogs, repairman, China, angry, sleeping, writing, having breakfast, playing, garbage, neat, dishwasher, getting ready, army, American Indians, good breakfast, happy woman, windy, medicine, memories, action, sticky, airplane, roses, movie, arthritis, dead, lipstick, building, Scotsman, space. Paying the bills. Constructing. Paying the cab. Daddy's shoes. Listening. Angry. Thinking. Happy. Doctor. Dorothy. Off to work. Surprised. Praying. Happy. Relaxing. Grooming.
Did you think of those exact words when those images came up? It's something I'm endlessly fascinated in how the words that she assigns are always baffling, but also correct in their own special way. The next work that was 2011. Concurrently with making that video, I became really interested in color as a system that helps us understand how to move through the world. But this show, which was called I, Apple, and Why, was specifically interested in photographing and visualizing ways in which one moves through the boroughs of New York. So I learned about a color deck that's used throughout the States, and I'm sure it permeates Melbourne and other cities as well. A federal color deck that any color system that is managed by the federal government, from space outfits to safety colors to highway colors, that there's this particular color system that manages all of that color. And at a local level, there's a municipal color that's maintained by a design commission who chooses and maintains the color of bridges within the 5 boroughs. So any bridge that's maintained by the city has this particular palette. And I was really interested in the idea of color that you never see in close proximity. A bridge you see in the distance, or you traverse at a speed where you're not really registering the color or the palette. And I was really interested in talking with people who were a part of this commission about choosing color based on how they anticipate it would age, how it would get dirty from car exhaust, how it would weather from sun exposure. So a palette that's based on wear and tear, and never as fresh as its initial application. So the horizontal 4x8 flats on the wall and the sculptures on the ground are all from this color deck. And the 4x8, so 4 foot wide by 8 foot long, is a standard building size within the States. And the blue corner piece, the green box, as well as the sort of burgundy rhombus shape are all made from taking a 4x8 and folding it to make these other shapes. The yellow is from this larger federal deck I mentioned. And then the panels that go around the wall, there's 15 of them that created a frieze around the room. And each panel had a grid of 4 photographs, all photographs that I shot just walking around the city. And I was interested in the kind of walking pace of this exhibition, New York being, a city that's a real pleasure to walk through, but paying attention to the detail of these particular people, locations, and encounters, and creating a particular rhythm around the room, as well as this more administrative color and structural color that ran throughout the exhibition. This is also the first time that I began working with steel, and both the steel, this color system, and thinking about color as something that guides us, but also is like in the peripheral vision, or has a particular set of intention became really fascinating to me, and you'll see it plays out within my work subsequently and to this day. Concurrently with making the iApple New York show, I first exhibited and is in Nancy with an exhibition where I first made these laser cut steel works and started to, and in this instance, rather than it being a particular municipal color or a federal color, thinking about a color that relates to the expression that's laser cut into the spray finished steel. So nothing to declare. You may be familiar with it as a phrase in clearing customs, and thought about, the simplicity of green means go. It goes without saying, and this sun shape has the sun is something that rises and sets without us doing anything, and this almost crayon color yellow. And then a negation, or something that would have also a sound of the no. It's called no, no, no. And something that may conjure an oral property in addition to this repetition of language that generates the form. Moving ahead to 2017 to the exhibition I had at the Carpenter Center, I started to think about not only this return to the work that I was doing with my mother, which I thought about as some type of visual dictionary or a sort of way of thinking about the complexity of making an image serve as a placeholder for language, and worked on this long project with my family, with my parents, my siblings, and my nieces and nephew, to think about a more expansive idea of a familial dictionary. What is language that's inherited from family? What is language that's culturally processed, rooted in class, rooted in location? And made this 2-channel work called Generation, in which I asked my family, it's a multi-part work, but one part that I'll focus on for this brief talk is to ask my family to provide definitions to a series of words. It's 19 words, and to give them both a definition and in certain instances to provide a shape, a weight, a movement, and a color. So what you're seeing here is the installation at the Carpenter, and one of the channels featuring my nephew in the rear room. I'm going to show 3-minute-ish excerpts from the video with different family members. The first is of my father providing his form to the word mother.
Strict.
And if you had to give that word a shape, what would that shape be?
Rolling pin.
And what color?
Mahogany.
And is that a solid color?
Yes.
And is it light or heavy?
Heavy.
And is it still or in motion?
Is it what?
Still or in motion?
Still.
This is my niece.
Anger. It's usually when you're angry. It's like you're really mad and just have a lot of emotions. So yeah, you don't really feel happy or anything good like that.
And what's the shape of that word?
I don't really.
What would you, if you had to choose a shape for it, what would it be?
I guess a square.
And what color would it be?
Like red and orange, dark colors.
So dark red and a dark orange?
Yeah.
And would it be a solid color?
Yeah.
And is it light or heavy?
Heavy.
And is it still or in motion?
like in motion,
And what type of motion?
like punching or yeah, it's like mean
Mm-hmm.
motions.
It's pretty good, right? This is my other niece.
Home is where you live or come from, and you never forget what it feels like to be home and see your family. And like seeing somebody for a long, like haven't seen somebody for a long time is like being home and spending like your whole life with them.
And what would the shape be for the word home?
Home would be an arrow.
And what color?
Turquoise.
And is the turquoise arrow, is it a solid color?
It's a solid color.
And is the turquoise arrow light or heavy?
Light.
And is it still or in motion?
It's still.
So that exhibition started at a nonprofit in New York called Participant and then traveled to the Carpenter Center. So what you're seeing here is an installation shot from Participant. When you entered the space, the 2-channel video was behind the printed sheetrock that's in the rear. When you entered the space, there are these 2 quite large, say like, sorry for my absolute lack of translation to metric, but they're big. And so there's also laser cut steel sculptures that are like this. And I worked with a musician and artist named Sergei Cherpnin, who actually played the steel sculptures with mallets and recorded that sound and then made about a 40-ish minute looped track that when you would go up to the interior of the sculpture, that central cut shape would function like a speaker. So it played an audio that was generated by making it. And I was interested in this idea of the generational echo being manifest within these sculptural forms and thinking about a color that is shadow. So what is a palette of a shadow of these like grays and blues and burgundies, and tried to also think about color that was in dialogue with one another. So I don't believe you'll see an install shot, but there's a different color that's sort of a hybrid of this blue, this sort of Prussian blue and burgundy in the rear space that was adjacent to the videos. But yeah, this is the first time I ever worked with a sound element that I really hope to return to. But these are called cutouts echo. And then in the rear is a work called staging. So since about 2009, I've printed on sheetrock and just a process of feeding the material through a flatbed inkjet printer so that the paper above the gypsum functions like, a printing paper, and then using that material to create this screen-like structure. And the objects that you see printed on it are objects from my different family members' homes that either play a significant role in footage in which I interview them or something that is off camera that's important to their individual home. So the puppet at the left is something that my niece, Natalia, the first person who spoke, made for a class assignment. My sister her mother's dollhouse that my niece inherited. These different heirlooms that tell stories within these homes or were directly activated within the interviews on the other side of the wall. So this, we moved to 2019, and this is a work called Have You Seen My Language? And in 2016, I started working with a mass-produced English language set called Language Builder, and I wanted to move away from working with my mother's collection for a brief period of time, and chose this particular collection because of the simplicity of its form and the sort of dated but hard to pinpoint time of the images. It's sort of late 80s to early 2000s perhaps, but so I made this work at a time where I didn't have a studio and created a system in which I could make a work in my home with really particular parameters. So I could only make photographs with my iPhone. I could only make photos during the day, and I had to photograph images from this collection within the parameters of my apartment. So I could go as far as the fire escape or window ledge, but that space dictated these pairings. So the image of a toilet from the set is with my toilet, but then things are more associative, like the image of glasses is where I put my glasses before bed, or where the toast goes with the toaster, etc. And it was sort of remarkable to feel really limited by not having a studio at this time, and then making something that was tremendously generative and something that I've returned to over the last 6 years. So these are mounted photos that are then slid through U-channel, so a steel channel that's powder coated. And then I showed this work at MoMA between last fall, November of 23 to April of 24 in a collection show, along with a really incredible collection of different artists that were dealing with photography and language as this broad prompt. More recently, within, say, the past 6 months, I returned to working with my mother's collection and made this work, which is called Polar Bears to Laundry. This is the first time I've worked with the actual physical card. And have been making these works, again on steel, but absent of a color as I had previously shown. These are 72 inches, so about 6 feet by 42 inches, so nearly 4 feet in size. And I'm assembling the cards in a sentence-like structure where there's either a formal relationship between what's depicted from left to right, or there's some associative logic as to why I group them as such. And this, gives you a sense of the physical quality of the cards. They were laminated, any text was cut out, and sometimes there was collaging, as you see on the rightmost card with the collaged laundry that functions as a sort of second leg for that person. Going back to 2019 for the exhibition where I first showed Have You Seen My Language, I took on the largest production project that I've done to date, where I chose 4 flashcards that my mother made and wanted to create a high fidelity remake of each of them, and then create a commercial length video, so approximately 1 minute, in which there are these mini narratives that emanate out of the image. So what you'll see in the next 3 examples is my mother's original image at right, and then my reconsideration or reassembly at the left. So I worked with a set dresser, a costume designer, a casting agent, quite a big team to meticulously get as close as possible to that original image. The three examples that I'll show have different short narratives. This one is the only one where I wrote a script, and it's based on a conversation that I had with my maternal grandmother when I completed college. So this is, about 1 minute and 8 seconds.
Estoy tan orgullosa de ti.
Gracias, abuela. Y gracias por esta fiesta.
Pero por supuesto, has trabajado tanto y te mereces una celebración.
Gracias.
Y te graduaste con honores. Estoy tan orgullosa.
Gracias. I'm very lucky.
Nada de suerte. You work your ass out.
Off, abuela. La expresión es work your ass off.
Oh.
It's still one of the strangest artworks I've made to date. Hope to surpass that strangeness. What's this word? I was very interested in the sort of like erotics of some of these images as well. So I suppose this is socks. Just know I'm off camera saying, make a weird smile. Success. This was somehow the most difficult to get right, but and then these are a series of works that I'm exhibiting right now at the University of Georgia at a space called the Athenaeum. And they're, again, steel panels. In this case, I'm returning to the mass-produced flashcard set that you saw on Have You Seen My Language? And like the panel with polar bears to laundry, this associative logic from the leftmost card to the right. And these images are UV printed directly on steel, and then that brown band is painted in flash paint, which is a vinyl graphic paint, if you're familiar with it. And this is called butter to brown. And this is globe to forklift operator. This is cat with various circles. This panel spray finished. The silver that you see, the paint is removed, and then the white is actually punctured. The image of the cat is from my mother's set. The others are from the mass-produced set. This is called Parrot to Clouds. And I should say, again, the green is this flash paint. And the white that sort of brackets this panel is also painted. What you're seeing in the middle are cast aqua resin cylinders. I was imagining some game that's sort of in between a push-button phone or a rotary phone that if you were to interact with those cylinders, it would change the order of the images, perhaps. So that's a side view. They extend at different lengths. And for the exhibition that's at the Athenaeum, this was the commissioned work, which the documentation is unfortunately pretty horrible. So it was very recently reshot, but the tabletop of this sculpture, which is called a table and grid, is the same dimensions as those panels with the printed images. And the objects that are on the tabletop are also cast in aqua resin. So you see the variety of objects from a pair of blue jeans to high heel shoes, underwear, building blocks, lipstick, plastic tiara. I was edited down to these particular objects. I'm not interested in there being a finite narrative, but I'm interested in the place of play and thinking about a landscape that comes out of play, a familiar type of child's play with the building blocks and train set, but also something where there's some type of gender formation or developmental narrative that may be at play, but completely open to interpretation. And again, these are all cast aqua resin, same as the cylinders, and then have a variety of treatments. So from latex paint to rubbed powdered pigment, oil paint, gouache, colored pencil, everything is sort of tailored to the cast object's original surface and material. And it's on sawhorses that you can see to the bottom left of this image. And the precedent for this table is this tabletop work that I made for what was the first triennial at the New Museum back in 2009. And this exhibition, I was invited specifically to make an installation that was an outgrowth of a book I had made with printed matter at the same time called America, America. So what you see at the left is a overall of that book as a diptych sculpture called America, America 1 and 2. Again, these are works on sheetrock. The Barbara Kruger is like a very shallow etch into layers of paint to peel away that material to get this shallow relief. And the portraits to the right are a series of portraits of people who were born in 1986. And the America book looked at a relationship between 86, the end of Ronald Reagan's presidency and the lead up to what became the election of Barack Obama. And then there's an intergenerational conversation between artists who finished college in 86 and people who were born in 86 who were about to complete their art history and arts-related studies in 2008. And then the central work is this tabletop sculpture with this lattice pattern that I've worked with on numerous occasions. And what you're seeing is the casts of hands of mayors. So I did a road trip in summer of 2007 where I cast the hands of mayors between New York and New Mexico. And I loosely followed the route of this bizarre project that took place in May of 1986 called Hands Across America, in which people joined hands, not literally, but people joined hands from Battery Park, New York to Long Beach, California. And it was organized by somebody named Ken Keegan, who had been involved previously in the creation of We Are the World, and was the agent for Kenny Rogers and Lionel Richie. And I was fascinated in this significant cross-country event, this highly produced event that was supposed to be a fundraiser for America's homeless population. That was happening concurrently under Reagan's presidency, which meticulously undermined and undid social infrastructure and criminalized welfare and did away with financial infrastructure that would have directly led to higher rates of homelessness in the country. And it's also, 86 is a time where HIV and AIDS is starting to be understood in popular culture. So I was interested in this idea of a public event where people are engaged in physical touch with strangers, while also supposedly raising money for houseless population. And some of the mayors who I met with participated in that event as teenagers and then went on to hold these positions of local office. And it was a really fascinating experience because I dealt with mayors in larger cities like Minneapolis, but also met with mayors in a town like Mays, Kansas, where the town is so small that I met with mayors in their homes and met their grandchildren and cast their hands in their backyards. So it's a very different understanding of local government and a different kind of snapshot of moving through the country at that particular time. So moving towards the end of my brief talk, this project was really fascinating to me to try to make sense of what a generation is, what binds a generation, what establishes a generation, where there is a generational echo, or where there's a critique between two groups. So as I had briefly mentioned for this project, I was looking at people who finished college. I worked with Greg Bordowitz, TJ Wilcox, Elizabeth Payton, Collier Shore, D.W. Fitzpatrick, and Mark Dion. I'm forgetting someone. But anyway, I was interested in people who were finishing their undergraduate studies at the same time. In this particular case, these are all people who went to School of Visual Arts in New York, and their lives that were directly involved in activism. Activism as it pertained to Central America, HIV and AIDS-related activism, people who were directly involved with ACT UP on a regular basis, and talking about their time as young art students and what that life was like, that they were directly involved in these causes while pursuing art degrees. And then their reflections on people who were about to finish college and the projections of a sort of political inadequacy or lack of activism and involvement. And then that younger generation reflecting on the older generation's comments and trying to assess their place within what was at that point years into the Iraq War and what their own activism was, or negotiating activism through social media or different platforms that had changed in the recent past. And I'm not interested in the two-party system within the US, but I'm interested in the timeline of an election as just a way to bracket time and to revisit time. And so more recently in 2020, I made a publication called 1996 that looked at, it used America as a template to look at this time period, again, to look at people who were finishing college in 96, as well as people who had, if they went to college and at 18 or so were about to graduate from arts-related studies, who were born in 1986. And this bracket is looking at the re-election of Bill Clinton to the initial, to the election of Joe Biden in 2020. So I was interested in mapping this historic echo, if you will, and also thinking about how these times are envisioned in mass media, where they're stories that have eerie echoing in the present moment. Can he make peace of Netanyahu comes to mind, but also ideas of populism as it was forming at that time that then have very clear echoes with Trump's presidency. And I was also interested in the idea of how popular culture was imaging the future. So this is a Kenneth Cole ad from 1996, envisioning what the year 2020 would be like. So if you can't read the text, computers can cook, all sex is safe, and it's illegal to bear arms and bare feet. The future is what you make of it. And then this nascent understanding of the internet, that the internet isn't for everybody. So proposing the internet as something that's actually alternative, or it's for funky people. It's and how each provider marketed that to its consumer. And then this is a group portrait, as you saw in the new museum install, but this is for the 96 book of sort of class portrait of people who were born in 96. And so I'll end here by saying I'm really interested in thinking about this idea of when you can formulate a kind of concept of your generation. What's the amount of time that needs to transpire in order for you to reflect on your generation, or what are you actively doing now to record what it means to be a first, second, third year PhD student at this moment, and what's your active mode of archiving to tell that story 5 years, 20 years, however long from now. But there is a kind of stylistic echo between these people born in the 90s and they look like people that Dane and I went to college with, but it's rooted within fashion, not necessarily within a particular politic, or it's very interesting to learn from them about how they were making sense of these particular sociopolitical time. And so as a teacher, I'm always trying to actively nudge my students to think about what is this idea of real-time recording of a history that's transpiring, and how is it informing your work, either directly, obliquely, but then where does a kind of group portrait come in? Where does a collective activity of engaging one another in this terms of a generation, or a sort of ideas of how you come together around X, Y, or Z topic. So I brought a bunch of these publications with me from New York for year two people who are in this room, for the class shortly around 1:15. I have physical copies of books for you to page through, but I'm here to the 22nd. If you would like to look at anything, just let me know. Thank you.
Matt, really, thank you for your generosity and firstly, for coming to visit. And thank you for the generosity you've expressed in sharing your practice. We've got time for a couple of quick questions. Does anyone have? Oh, yeah, please. Thank you. Was this from one of our third-year students? Yeah. Thank you. Please.
wondering regarding the hands or other like products of work or other products of work that are like based on context or like based on like specific research and also like specific materials that are held away from the work. You like had any way of contextualizing the hands in the room?
Yeah.
There's like that.
Yeah. So the hands, the material of the hands was determined by speed. Like what was the quickest way I could create a record of this person's hand. So I took the Hands Across America as at its most literal and wanted to take the hand of the person that I engaged with. So I used what's it used traditionally for dental mold. So something that sets really quickly and is very detailed rich. So if I met with someone who only had 5 minutes, I could come away with a cast of that time. Some people I would have a whole afternoon, but sometimes it was 5 to 10 minutes before they were going on to do something else. So that material was chosen specifically for a quick set mold, and then the cast itself is made in hydrocal, which is like a much more resilient plaster that would allow me to like quickly pack it up and get on the road. So there was a lot of decisions for that work that was just about practicality. And then they're painted in acrylic paint, 2 photos that I took of the hands to get them as close to the likeness as possible. But that happened back in New York, and I had, a much slower process. Yes.
If like this, if you had any like supporting documentation, like
Yes. Yeah. So for that particular exhibition, when I showed it, not at the new museum, but in the previous exhibition, it was rooted in like the whole exhibition had weekly programming that elaborated on concepts that I was interested in that were mirrored in the publication, as well as that experience of the road trip. So there was no, there was actually a speaker who I invited as part of that programming who I met during my travels in Santa Fe. But that was a way to have some type of reflexive space activated programmatically that wasn't contingent on the static object. So maybe that gets to what you're after. Yeah.
We might actually, you got to ask the question, Dane.
Matt, could you talk about maybe just talk a little bit about the relationship that you have in your practice between the exhibition and the publication, and how those things coincide or cross over?
Yeah.
Form one another. Or, how does it you work across those 2 forms and what they?
Yeah. So I can't overstate how important publication making has been to my life, and because this is such a short time together in this format, I focus more on an overview of things that I've made. But I started a publication when I was in my first year of grad school called North Drive Press. That was a semi-annual publication that came in a box, and it was comprised of artist-to-artist interviews and multiples that I helped to produce in an edition size of 500. And I started that project in grad school. The first issue came out the summer after I finished my degree. And then I finished my master's in 2004, and the last issue came out in 2010. So in tandem with making that publication, I began exhibiting, I began teaching, and the correspondence between the publication and the exhibition was constant. So this example of thinking about how America as a book both became animated as sculpture, but how its content was also built into the exhibition, I was really interested in. For North Drive Press, for those of you who'll see a copy, it comes in a box and there's no beginning, middle, or end. You sort of rifle through it and you can rearrange it every time you go through the box. And I was really interested in the idea of the box being a space like a gallery or an exhibition space that could be perpetually reconfigured. So part of my interest in working with sheetrock was also a material that is the wall. So the skin could be, printed on, installed, deinstalled, hung on top of, and then the artist-to-artist interviews or writing could have a correlate in programming within the space, screenings, different events that would animate the work that would take on a different life because of that programming. So I was really interested in this idea of, how to make something have, a multi-use life that wasn't contingent on stasis. And because, there's often this research underpinning how to animate that without it being contingent only on a book form. Is that helpful? Okay.
Right, we'll make this one the last one. Yeah, please.
Actually going back to some of the works that were cool, particularly the ones which are like photographs placed on sort of like a large unifying sort of frame, like the sheetrock or the steel. Yeah, like these sort of.
Okay.
I was just wondering, like, when you're making or interacting with works, like, do you have like a kind of a system or way of thinking about how they interact, like how the images interact with each other, or like the forms interact with each other on the plane, and how that creates like a narrative or something?
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's like a very clear relationship, but it's I guess not so dissimilar than my mother's like naming of images, that they're clear to me, but maybe don't translate. But for me, the logic is perhaps most direct of the butter goes out on the spaghetti looks like the snake looks like the belt and the gloves are made from the cow is brown. And in this particular case, it works both ways. So brown is the cow makes the gloves and the belt are leather, the belt looks like the snake looks like pasta, So that logic continues throughout these works. So there's nothing, for me, that's arbitrary in their grouping and their sequencing, but it is up for interpretation. So the way that they're titled, of globe to forklift operator, hopefully encourages someone that there is a left to right reading. But in this case, there's something that's like expansive, and then the cast element becomes something that's both, for me, alluding to interactivity, but it is also fixed. So, but I was interested in something that has the potential for animation, even if it's only an illusion. Okay, thank you.